welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We've solved some technical problems, so it looks like we're ready to start. Let's hope we continue in good form. I'm Tom O'Keefe, President of the Placentia Area Historical Society. We are here this evening to commemorate a 450-year-old Basque wheel written in Placentia for Domingo de Luca in 1563, on this date, May the 15th. And before we start, we'll invite the town crier, Angus Stewart, to give a proclamation.
Oh yea! Oh yea! Oh yea! Ye lads and ye lassies, I bid all welcome to this commemoration of a Basque will written by a seaman aboard the ship La Maria el Juncal when he became ill in 1563 while fishing here. He expressed the wish that if he passed on, he be buried in Placentia. This is now believed to be the oldest original civil document written in Canada. This is another reminder of the great and diverse history of Placentia. We take this opportunity to recognize the Basque presence in those early days before the arrival of the French, the English, the Irish, and the Americans. We invite all present to support the efforts of the Placentia Area Historical Society in spreading the word of Placentia's history and maintaining its memory. May all people recognize the great history and culture of this community and the surrounding area. Proclaimed on this, the 15th day of May, 2014. God bless Placentia and the surroundings. God save the Queen.
In order to give some background on the Basque in Newfoundland, during the early years, we have invited archaeologist Steve Mills to be our main speaker tonight. Steve Mills has been a professional archaeologist for over 30 years. He has worked on many archaeological sites in Newfoundland and Labrador, from the bottom of the Bjorn Peninsula to the northern tip of Labrador. He has spent over 17 years with Parts Canada, 3 years at Signal Hill, and 14 years working on military and domestic historic sites in Ontario. Sites of notable interest include the 16th century Basque whaling capital at Red Bay, Labrador, the Beotic site in Boys Cove, and at the site of the colony of Avalon in Fairyland. Steve did his master's research on the site of a 17th century English West Country fisherman's home in Renews. He also investigated the site of another 17th century planter's house and an 18th century tavern in Renews. I wonder how long he spent researching the tavern. He worked on several small military and other historic sites in downtown St. John's. Steve became involved with the archaeological project in Placentia in 2001, when investigations began on Mount Pleasant. He took over the Placentia project in 2006 and spent the summers of 2006 and 2007 directing the project in Jersey Side. In the fall of 2007, he began working with the Department of Justice as a research analyst, but stayed involved with the Placentia project as an advisory. He is married to Edwina Casey of St. John's, whose grandparents are from Jersey Side, Meads, and Pointford Greens. So Steve is well qualified and well connected to speak with us tonight. I therefore welcome archaeologist Steve Mills to help us discover our Basque history.
Okay, what I'm going to talk to you about just briefly, those of you who've seen me talk before, I come on for a dog's age if you don't shut me up. So I'd like to just give an overview of the Basque from what I know about their involvement in Newfoundland, a little bit in Placentia, some in Labrador, and also in the other parts of eastern Canada. My connection with the Basque research go back about 35 years. I worked in Red Bay when I was a young man in the late 1970s. And that was the first time that we actually began to investigate, people from this province began to investigate the Basque heritage. No one really knew anything about it before that. We all thought about the English and of course knew about the French and Basque and all that stuff, but no one really had a concept about other nations that were over here exploiting the resources of the waters off of Newfoundland and Labrador. So that got me interested in the Basque history, very much so back 35 years ago. And since then, everything I could ever find written on Basque and the Basque, particularly in our province, I've tried as best to incorporate into the stuff that I understand. And when I came to work in Placentia in 2006 and 7, it was in the summer of 2007 when we found the first definite Basque artifacts, and that really got me interested in my jumpings. There's a great presence of Basque people here. Now, that's kind of what got me really interested in that part of Placentia's history. So what I'd like to begin with is just to, for all of you from Placentia, I'm not going to teach about your history, but as you know, Placentia was founded on the fishery, as was all the other communities in our province. And among the first to come here were the Bretons, who came from Brittany, the Normans, who came from Normandy, and also the Basque, who came from northern Spain and southern France. And I suspect they were here since the very beginnings of the 16th century, in the early 1500s. But we have confirmed evidence from the 1520s, where we start getting documentary records of them actually coming here and that kind of stuff. So that kind of confirms that by the 1520s, we're starting to get legal documents being drawn up in the Basque Country that actually refer to Newfoundland and actually Placentia itself. Because for some reason or another, which I don't understand, it's a great place to live and a great place to fish, they really focus a lot of their energies on this bay, but also this very town itself. And it's pretty obvious why they chose Placentia, because of the beaches were tremendous for laying out fish. It was defensible with the hills surrounding Placentia, because there was a time that was pretty rough politically in Europe in the 16th century. So you had to always have your guard up, and every ship that came over, every little fishing ship even had guns on a cannon to protect themselves. And there's a tremendous amount of back and forth between nations warring, and really on these sort of, not piracy, but like privateering. Like, if you're not one of us, we're going to go up against you sort of mentality. So your defense was always a big part of it. Get back to my notes here. So we certainly know that the Basque were here by the 1520s, but I would suspect that they were here, at the very origins of the 16th century. Probably even before. I've heard rumors, and I don't know if they're true, about Basque, over here fishing in the 1480s, along with the Bretons and the Normans and all these guys. These are all people who live in the south of France and the northern Spain. But certainly, by the 1520s, we have all of this sort of documentation going towards it. In the 1550s, we start seeing a major legal sort of interest in the Basque fishery here in Newfoundland, and particularly right in Placentia. So I've seen a number of documents that begin, I think the earliest one is like 1558, and they name Placentia specifically as like, you, Captain so-and-so, your ship's name, the size of your ship, the port you're coming out of in the Basque Country, and you're to go to Placentia and catch the fish there and bring the fish back and sell it in this port and that port. They're very specific. These are legal documents that are, because it was a very expensive undertaking. So they want to make sure that the backers make sure that they get got their due and got their money back. So that was a very neat sort of realization that, yes, we have this legal document, we have what we always knew as Newfoundlanders and Labradorians as being part of fishery, but now we have documentary evidence, and it continues right in through the 17th century as well. So it's pretty nice. What I have up here on the screen is some pictures of Placentia, but that's the Basque flag down on your bottom, on the bottom right. Incidentally, St. Pierre, I'll just throw this in, St. Pierre, we think of them as French, but they're actually Basque, and part of the St. Pierre's flag, I think, is part of the Basque flag. And so they maintain, they're still here, basically. The Basque never left us, mercifully, right? So, and they bring us lots of rum and stuff, if you're living down the Bjorn, so. I don't know how Placentia really got its name, but there's a little town in the north of Spain called Plasencia. I suspect that's probably one of the places, because all the New World. So I don't know if that's really why it's named Placentia. There's lots of people go back and play songs and all this stuff, but I think it's just as good a reason to think that it was named after this town as anywhere else. The English knew Placentia by the name that we know it today, and for those of you who are unaware of it, King Henry VIII was born in the Palace of Placentia, which is in London, actually in Greenwich, which is in the north of London. So that's, and King Henry VIII was born in the 1480s. So that's got that Placentia, the English name Placentia. So I don't quite know where the name comes from, but I wouldn't be surprised if it came out of the Basque Country. These are some of the names that the town was called over the years, and you can see, the first maps being drawn were drawn, but they weren't by the English, they were by the French and the Portuguese and the Basque, and they had different names that they would put on it. You can see there the Ile de Plaisance, Ile de Plaisance. The English, as I said, the earliest references from that is from the 1570s, and they're calling it Plaisance. So I don't quite know where that comes from, but you can see that it was recognized very early as a place to record in the history. And as I mentioned, King Henry VIII's birthplace. So I think there's something to all that, right? The earliest really neat maps of the English maps of Newfoundland was one drawn that was published in 1628 by the then governor of Placentia, of Cupid's, John Mason. And he talks about, he names it Placentia, Placentia Bay, Placentia Town, Little Placentia, all this kind of stuff. So it was, well known. With regards to the Basque, who were these people? Where did they come from? You can see from the images here, the Basque country today, it was once a separate nation. Now we think of it as the Spanish Basque and the French Basque. But the people in the 16th century did not consider themselves Spanish or French, they were Basque. They had a different language. They were very, oddly enough, and I think this goes back, 30, 40, 50,000 years. There's a genetic connection between the Brits and the Celts in what are now England and Ireland and Scotland and the Basque people. The Basque people, there's a lot of intermixing over the last 500-600 years. But I've met lots of Basque people who are as white as somebody who stepped off the wharf in Cork or stepped off the quay in London. So they're not that sort of Spanish, dark-skinned, kind of people. They have red hair, blue eyes, so they would fit in very well with people that came from the north. And so genetically, there's a link, back to that, but that's probably back 30,000 years, right? But right now, there's about, I think, 2.5–3 million Basque people living they're part of France and Spain. You may recall the Basque terrorists, all that movement that went on in the 70s and 80s. Sadly, a lot of people died. But that sort of talks about their fierce kind of loyalty to themselves. So, in some of the French documents, when they settled, when they settled Placentia in the 1660s, they talked a lot about, when they were writing back to the French, king and the people, they talked about the trouble they were having with the Basque migratory guys. So these guys, they didn't want to be fooled around with by the French authorities. They figured Placentia was theirs. Who are these interlopers coming in from France and telling us what to do? There's a tremendous amount of animosity between the migratory Basque fishery and the settlers who were coming from France. Right now there are 3 Spanish Basque provinces and there are 3 French Basque provinces. I'm not going to try to impress you with my Spanish language, but some of the place names in the towns you may recognize. Places like Biarritz is in the south of France. That's in the Basque country. Saint-Jean-de-Luz played a major role in Placentia itself. And towns like Seabourn was another. These are all big fishing ports that they sent a lot of people over. And Navarre, Lower Navarre was one of the French provinces, and that plays a role later on, as I'm going to show you. And again, to show you, so I don't know if this is connection back with the Celts and the Brits and stuff, but the instruments that they play remind you, like, you got bagpipes and all that kind of stuff. You got bagpipes, you try to say Scottish and the Irish and the Basque, right? And accordions and stuff. So that, again, shows some kind of connection, I think, with the, you know, not with Europe as much as with, you know, the islands off of England and Ireland. As I mentioned to you, there were a lot of legal documents that I've seen from the beginning in the 1550s rather, and continuing well up into the 17th century, the 1600s, that talk about, you know, come here and don't go anywhere else. Come to Placentia, catch your fish, and bring it back. They made references to the cod caught here in Placentia as the king of cod. So for whatever the reason, if it was the water or the beaches or whatever process that they made, they always considered that the fish caught here in Placentia was superior to anywhere else in the whole New World. So that's why they maintained this kind of insistence. You got to come here and do this. Excuse me. The connection with southern Labrador began in the 1540s and Placentia. That's why I show you some images here of the whale fishery, which really only began in the 1540s, but I've seen documents where they talk about sending over whaling ships with migratory fishermen on it. They came to Placentia, dropped off the migratory fishermen and their shallops and whatnot, and then carried on up into what they call the Grand Baia, or the Great Bay, which we know as the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the Strait of Belle Isle. So they would come here first, drop off the fishing crews, head to Labrador, catch whales, and also trade a lot with the Aboriginal people, with the native peoples, which I'll tell you a little bit about later on. But so they're the same people as when you talk about the Basque whalers of Labrador. Well, it's the same people as the same Basque fishermen who were here in Placentia. They're the same, probably same families, come from the same ports. So a very major connection with Parks Canada's site up in Red Bay and the town of Placentia here. So that's something I'm hoping one day that the Parks Canada will realize this is a great opportunity here to get Placentia a lot more research done here on that connection with Labrador. I mentioned the trade that they did with the native people in Canada. We don't know anything about what happened with the Beothuk. The Beothuk, for a long time, people, scholars, and for lack of real sort of evidence, they all thought that the Beothuk were kind of, you know, the secretive tribe of Aboriginal people and no one knew much about them. I'm willing to bet everything I own that the Basque were trading with Beothuk. They had to be, because the Basque were all over the island. They weren't just here, they were up in Trinity Bay and Monte Vista Bay, and the Beothuks were there too. And one of the earliest references to meeting Beothuks comes from the early 1500s, and they say that they met these Beothuk guys, and they were carrying what they call Biscayne oars. Now, Biscayne oars are for Bay Biscay. That's what they were called, the Biscaynes. The Basque, that was another name on them. So the Beothuk were carrying, you know, Basque oars with them. There was one reference to them having a sword, pieces of a sword, which might also come from the Basque. But the Basque were very much involved in the native trade as well, and certainly as the 1500s went down. And I've seen references to them coming in, you know, to Placentia, and then the instructions are given right to the captains on the ship. You know, you come here, you drop off your crew in Placentia, and then you go up to Canada, they called it, sometimes, or the Grand Baia, and they said trade with the Aboriginal people. So in that slide here, which I've got a fancy thing if it works, Placentia, where all of that shaded area is supposed to be where they were trading with native people. So you can see they include Newfoundland, but there's no reference to the 16th century, 17th century trade with the natives, but I'm sure with the Beothuk in particular, but I'm darn well sure that they were doing it. But they had a lot of trade going on in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And they talk about bringing things, for instance, in this one document that I came across, they talk about, you know, heading straight up to Canada, and part of the ship's cargo was 200 new red copper kettles trimmed with iron, a large quantity of knives, different sorts of cloth, and hardware. The Basque country was very industrious. That's why Spain wanted to keep them, because it was a very industrious area, lots of metalworking, that sort of thing. It was a very rich country. So they were bringing knives and axes, copper. These are big copper kettles. These are not like something you'd boil your tea in. These are like big around as the top of this podium, 18, 20 inches across. And we've never found any of these copper kettles here in Newfoundland or Labrador. Much as we'd like to, but they found a number of these, not a number, but several of them have been found on Aboriginal graves in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and as far west as Ontario. And they find these big copper, I've shown you two of them here, the ones on the top. And these are copper kettles that were found in native graves. Some of them I read of one guy who was buried standing up with a copper kettle put over his head. He was buried down in the ground. Big shafts. So these were very treasured items that they traded, and they traded for furs. This is the beginning of the fur trade in Canada in the 16th century. And one of the things that they also trade, and I show you pictures up here, is these little tinkle cones. They're little small pieces of copper. I think they made them from the copper kettles too. The copper kettles are great, but you can also cut them up and make little jewelry out of them. This is a dress down on the bottom right that's kind of made out of all tinkle cones. So they traded lots of neat stuff. So the Basque were not just into fishery, but the Basque were also interested in, the fur trade and all this kind of stuff. So that was pretty exciting. The Basque trade connections, as I said, we don't have any real references to them trading in Newfoundland, but what we found, and this is where I'll get more specifically onto the Vicentia, the Jersey side work that we've done, is one of the little beads we found, and this bead is probably as big as the top of your finger. The one on the, I think it's the one on the left we found here in Vicentia. The one on the right, which is a sister or brother to that one, came from the North Shore of St. Lawrence on a Basque and Inuit site from the 1600s, and they're virtually probably made in the same glass factory in Venice or whatever. Right? So that shows that we got that one piece here, and we got two of these beads, and then we got them showing up in up in Canada. So that really connects the two sites, Vicentia, plus with the the sites with the work that they're doing up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So that's pretty exciting, and that also speaks a lot about Vicentia and the connections with the rest of Canada. So, well, we have. For my knowledge, there's not a great ceramic tradition out of the Basque country. I think locals made their own pots and stuff, but we don't think of Basque ceramics as such. There are some that I know of that we found in Vicentia. We got some, not in Vicentia, up in Red Bay. We got some from down in Ferryland. But what the Basque ships would do, they'd leave their little ports in the north of Spain, the south of France, and they'd head up into France, and they'd get victualled or outfitted. And there they were getting the pottery and and this stuff wasn't coming over in empty pots. These were pots that were filled with food, oils, and this kind of stuff. So these are some of the ones that we got here from Vicentia, and they may well be belonging to the Basque migratory crews as well. You got some Normandy stoneware on the top. This stuff. We got Beauvais ceramics, which comes from France as well. And here, this is the Saint Ange ceramics, and then we got. And this stuff is from Spain. This is around the area of Merida, whatever you call it. So these are some of that, these are not Basque pottery, but I would think that they probably were from the Basque migratory fishers, plus from the French settlers as well. They were getting the same kinds of stuff. Nothing says Basque like roof tiles. I mean, like I said, we didn't have a lot of ceramics. There's not a lot of stuff you can say it's definitely Basque, other than the roof tiles. When I worked in Red Bay, they did a lot of, there they would roof their buildings in roof tiles, just like they do, like I have, this is a model of one down there on the bottom right. Thousands of roof tiles. They'd use them for ballast coming over. Like sometimes they'd use rocks, right? But these guys, they were bringing ceramics with them, ceramics away, well, they're rocks basically. They would bring them over as ballast and then offload them and load into whale oil, and the same with the fish. And these are full roof tiles here, as you see on the top right. The pieces on the left are ones that we found here in Jersey side. Now, I was going to say, when we dug the sites up in Red Bay, you get roof collapses, and you get layers of roof tile that could be like a foot thick. You think of a roof being sloped roof gets kind of saggy, all the tiles fall off, they fall around the edge of the roof, or edge of the building, they produce a layer up to a foot thick. We've never found anything similar to that over in Jerseyside. We've only found bits and pieces of these roof tiles, but they're the real deal, and you'll see some of them over in the case just over there by Lee. The Basque roof tiles that we found here are all in the same layers as the ceramics, and some of these I'm sure these are fisheries-related features. These are down about 3 feet, as you can see. Ronnie Bishop's standing. Ronnie's about 6 feet tall, and he's there in the center and the bottom. So we had to dig down quite a bit, but that's the layers where all of the 17th century stuff is coming from. The image right here, this is evidence of the grabs. We call them the grave grabs. That's the fish drying areas. But some of these wooden remains we found, I'm pretty sure these are part of flakes and this kind of stuff. And I'm tempted to call this guy here. This was like an interwoven sort of layer of branches and this stuff. I'm thinking this is like the origins of these Newfoundland stick fences too, right? Sort of all sort of intrusive you got about it. That's just my own crazy opinion. But this is where we found a lot of the Basque roof tiles. And the roof tiles, like in Red Bay, where we found them in layers, we didn't find them like that here. We found one here, one there. They were never piles of them, as you would suspect came out of a roof when it fell down, but they were scattered about the site. But we found hundreds of pieces, and they could be from as big as your finger to as big as your hand. Not really big pieces. You'll see, there are some of the bigger ones. What I'm thinking is that these roof tiles, and I have a reference for roof tiles being used in the Basque Country as boundary markers between, because you don't have fences everywhere, but you would mark your property with roof tiles, and they're very, they stand out. They're red. They're nice and bright. So what I'm pretty sure that they are used for here was the Basque migratory guys used roof tiles to demarcate their properties, because these are migratory guys. They only came and they spent several months here. They left. But any good self-respecting bass fisherman who's coming into the centre for the first time, he's going to see all these properties marked out with roof tile. He knows, I'm not going to go here because that's a Basque fisherman's property. This one's over here. Oh, there's none over here. This is where I'm going to set up my shop. So that's what I think that they are used for here in Epicenter, as opposed to roofing of houses and this sort of stuff. As I said, the Basque had a big presence throughout eastern Canada, but they had a major presence here in Newfoundland, and one that some of us don't really always realize. A number of the place names, the obvious ones are like Port of Basque, right? Port of Port Peninsula, these are all named by the Basque. Selma Barkham is the woman who did a lot of archival research in the 1970s in Spain on behalf of the federal government of Canada, of the National Archives. And she came across a lot of documents about the whale fishery and the Newfoundland fishery. And a few years, quite a number of years ago, 89 or so, she put out this little booklet of maps that talk about place names and the Basque connection, the Basque Shore, she called it. It's mostly the West Coast. But that map of Newfoundland that you see there was drawn right in this very town in 1689 by a guy named Pierre Decheverry Dore. Now, to me, that's almost like a connection with the Echeverries. I don't know, maybe you could put the D before, but again, I'll leave that to others. But that map also shows Placentia itself. It's oddly because it's sort of named in the English style, even though it's written or drawn by a Basque cartographer. And this is him there. This is what says what it is. And there's that little inset, and there's your fort of Placentia, Little Placentia, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of neat to show us that connection to it as well. And on the left are a number, I don't know if you can read those, but there are a number of the West Coast communities that we now know, and then the Basque name for them. So these are all identified on the Basque maps that were looked at and saved and this kind of stuff. There's lots of Basque connections as well, as I mentioned, the Basque trading that they had up in Canada. But the Basque whalers went to Red Bay. There's some images. The one on the top left is one of the Basque whaling ovens that we dug in Red Bay. There's also Basque whaling ovens right up the St. Lawrence River in a little place oddly called Ile de Basque. And there they have Basque whaling ovens. They did the whaling continued after the 16th century. They kind of had killed all the whales that they could in the Strait of Belle and moved up to St. Lawrence, and they began whaling up there more in the 17th century, 1600s, and that's where that one belongs to. As Tom said, I did some work in renews back in the early 90s, and we were looking at a fisherman's house, an English fisherman's house, quite small. Underneath the front doors, rocks that sort of marked the front door, was part of a pewter goblet that the young woman who was working with us found. And what you see there, this is the base of the goblet. Right here, there's a sort of drawing of it. And it took me a while to figure it out, but what you're seeing there is they're called the chains of Navarre, the image on the right. It looks like an X of chains surrounded by a group of chains. And to the left of it are fleur-de-lis. If you look at the Basque coat of arms, that is exactly what you see there that I have circled in blue. These are the chains of Navarre, along with the fleur-de-lis, and that's what's on the bottom of that goblet. So that's a Basque goblet that shows up in the town of Renews from the 1600s. Also, we have some more documentation from Renews. Some of the earliest reference to piracy in the New World occurred in Renews. In 1582, an English rich guy who had been, had a lot of trouble with the Portuguese the year earlier, lost some ships. He took it upon himself to bring over 3 ships armed to the teeth with soldiers and swords and bayonets and whatever. He went into Renews and he looted 3 Portuguese boats there. And there was a big court case about it, and they talk about the French Basque fishing admiral who was in Renews in 1582. And as you probably all know, the fishing admiral is the first guy in the harbour. He's the admiral. There was a French Basque fishing admiral right in Renews in 1582. So that's another good documentary connection to the Basque being basically all over the Avalon Peninsula for sure. But these are one of the little parts, little physical evidence that we have of this Basque 15th century fishery continuing into the 16th century fishery continuing into the 17th century. I'm throwing this in, it has nothing to do with the Basque, but I discovered this the other day. This is part of the census of Placentia in 1699, and it actually shows where de Brouillon, the governor's house, was. It just came upon me. Right there, and there's his name, Monsieur de Brouillon. So we identify now, we just I think that's up by Phil's Cafe. It's just nice to kind of throw it. That's nothing to be bad with. I was so excited when I found it the other day, I throw it in. This is my last slide, and I'm going to talk about the poor Basque guys who didn't make it home, and this brings us to why we're here tonight. In Red Bay, in the early 80s, we discovered a cemetery that was, we looked at for several years. We knew that they had to die, lots of men up there, 1,000 Basque guys, whaling in a very dangerous environment, very dangerous line of work. We found a cemetery up there, and that's one of the actually 2 of these images that you see there, the one in the center top and the one on the right. A lot of these guys were multiple burials. Some of them had six dead guys that laid side by each. 6 men would be in a whaling boat, so we figured this is a boat tipped over. Sometimes the whalers win, sometimes the whale wins, right? So this is why we have evidence here. And one of the guys, and this is why I show this not great slide, but the one on the right, basically just a stain. Some of these burials were better than others. Some were perfectly preserved, like the poor four souls in there. One on the right was basically just a stain, but there's a cross on his chest. So we think that means that he had to be a priest. Because there is some references to priests coming, but again, not a whole lot. But this is the best example we have of a priest there. We also have, there's a reference right here from Placentia from 1585. There's a reference to another guy dying and wanting to be buried here in Placentia. And it's written out, not so much carrying me where the dead guys are like this will is. But whatever is in the language, I've never seen the will, but Selma Barker wrote about it. She said that whatever way to this phrase, there had to have been a priest, a Basque priest here in Placentia at the time, and that's in 1585. Now, were these guys buried in Placentia, and were the will references, I want to be buried where the other people are buried? I'm not really sure, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if it's where St. Luke's is today. St. Luke's is right that's shown there on the bottom left where the arrow is, and that's the map of Placentia from 1713, based on the earlier ones drawn by the French. Identifies the French convent and the French church. Of course, the graveyard is still there, and some of those were just basically burial markers. They didn't all have the the dough to put up a nice gravestone, but they had to mark the grave with a headstone and footstone, so you knew what the next time you're going to lay there. You don't want to dig up the guy you put in there last year. So I think some of these stone markers are from the graves. And that one there on the top left, I don't know if anybody knows anything about that, but that doesn't look like an English. Now, the ones that are written upon now are all English, right? They're written out in English and this stuff. This one, I don't know. I think that might be either French or Basque. It's just got a big cross on it, and it looks a lot different from the other ones from the 18th century grave marker. So that might itself be a French or certainly Basque tombstone. And on that note, I'm going to give a sign to Lee that they're going to bring on the actors, and that's the end of my introduction to the Basque and Placentia. I'll certainly, afterwards, I'm going to sit around and have any questions. I don't want to interrupt the rest of the show, but I'll be certainly glad to answer any questions that anybody has about what I might know about the Basque here in Placentia. And thanks very much to Tom and to the Historic Society for asking me to come here tonight, because I really love this stuff, and I talk to anybody about it as long as I can. So thank you very much.
How's Bingo doing? He doesn't look very good.
Nah, he's sleeping. We just finished writing his will.
That must have been a relief for him.
Yeah, he seemed to be okay with everything. He wanted to make sure everything would be arranged for his family. His debt's paid and all that. Although, one thing that was really important to him was that he be buried here in Placentia, in the cemetery.
Well, I guess it's only right that he be buried here. What else did he say?
Here's what he said in his will. I ask that if the will of God, our Lord, were certain to take me by this illness from the present life, that my body be buried in this port of Placentia, in the place where those who die here are usually buried.
I'm sure he'll rest in peace.
Well, I want to thank Steve Mills for providing us with some information on early Basque. And every time I hear any of this stuff, it just reminds me what a very diverse history we have here. It's our greatest asset. As usual, he has great information and evidence from his research to support it. I also want to thank these students from Laval High School for adding some interest to the story of the Basque by presenting this skit about De Luca's last hours. Following that event, which the students portrayed so well, Domingo de Luca died and was most likely buried, as Steve said, in the present Anglican cemetery here in Placentia. This was once a Catholic cemetery and the site of the first Catholic church in Newfoundland. At least I think that's reported. This burial would carry out the request in De Luca's will that the body be buried in this port of Placentia, in the place where those who die here are usually buried. And if you think about that, if there was a cemetery here and it's known about, it's probably been there for years, so this is 1563. We don't know how much earlier the Basque and others were visiting this community. In later years, Basque headstones were found in that site, but unfortunately we have not found one for Domingo de Luca. There's a sample of one of the headstones over there, which we have on display usually at the museum. Among the other things in the will, De Luca referred to his dates and receipts, appointed the ship's master and another person to be his executors, and named his wife as his heir. You will be able to see the details on our website at Placentia, and the will is translated into English so you can read it all. It'll be up tonight, but Steve borrowed my computer so I didn't get to put it up yet. At the end of the 1563 fishing season, Domingo's will was taken from the New World to Hondarribia, where on the 10th of October his widow presented it before the mayor and a notary for authentication and validation. It was incorporated in the notary's files, and the documents have survived for over 4.5 centuries in those files now kept in the archive in the Basque town of Oñati, where they were found and translated by historian Dr. Michael Barkham, who supplied this information to the Placentia Historical Society. Funds were provided by the Department of Tourism, Culture and Recreation and the Placentia Lions Club to get the translation and other related research done. It is not surprising that Michael Barkham is a historian with an interest in the Basque, as he is the son of renowned Selma Barkham, who studied about the Basque in Newfoundland and is known for groundbreaking work in Red Bay, Labrador. The will found by Dr. Michael Barkham is now believed to be the oldest original civil document written in what is now Canada. A couple of other Basque wills have been found to exist before that date, but the originals have not survived. This information is also available on our website. By the way, anyone wants to check on the website, there's little cards on the table back there with the address for you. We now want to unveil a framed picture of the will of Domingo de Luca, which in future is to be displayed in the O'Reilly House Museum. I'm asking Deputy Mayor Keith Parsons to come forward and unveil the will with me. Keith is the chair of the Tourism and Culture Committee for the town. Now, before I invite some speakers, I'd like to read a letter which we've received from the mayor of Hondarribia. I won't try to pronounce her name. I'm only half getting the town right, so I'm not sure about hers. And she says, "Dear residents of Placentia, as the highest representative of Hondarribia, I want to thank Placentia, all members of the Placentia Historical Society, and especially Michael Barkham for having put us in touch, the hometown of our sailor from Hondarribia, Domingo de Luca, and the town where he died. No one knows where their destiny lies, and Domingo probably never knew it. But what we are certain of is that wherever he went, he would have liked people to have known his roots, his Basque origin. Because of that, we want to take the opportunity of this presentation of the will to greet you, to thank you for your welcome, and to send you information about our town and invite you to come here and get to know it. With best wishes, the Mayor of Hondarribia." And with that, I guess we'll pass it over to our own mayor and invite Mayor Wayne Power to say a few words on behalf of the town.
Thank you, Tom. I guess the first question is, when do we leave? We'll take up the mayor on her invitation. So I knew he was going to say that. I knew that was coming. Good evening, everyone. It's certainly a pleasure to join you here this evening and bring you greetings on this event on behalf of the town. Of course, we have a couple of members of the Cultural and Tourism Committee joining us here this evening, along with members of the Historical Society. And it's this tonight is another great representation of the vast history that exists in the Placentia that we've been celebrating for the last number of years. And another true example, I guess, of a concrete example of those that have been here before us. Great to have this piece of history within the community now and be able to display it at the Historical Society at the Historical Society. I'll get it out in a minute. At O'Reilly House through the Historical Society, and Tom and his team are to be congratulated for their efforts in securing the will and getting it translated. I know Tom got a hold of this a couple of years back, and I knew from the first email that came out he wasn't going to be satisfied until he had the translation, and he had an event like this evening to bring it home to Placentia. So him and his team are to certainly be congratulated on their efforts that put together with this tonight. It's going to be great to have this here, and certainly will add to the tourism product and the history component of the community. I'm going to point out, also like to acknowledge the presence of some of the other people that have contributed to history over the years here. Of course, great to have Steve here to contribute tonight. I also see a couple of former members of the Historical Society in Ken and Charmaine joining us, along with some of the sponsors that Tom acknowledged already. We thank all of you for your support and your contributions to history over the years, and hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
While we're acknowledging people, and I know she's not expecting this, but I'd also like to note that a lady by the name of Lucy always here tonight, and she's the woman that I chased after for the money, and she's very obliging. She's with the Department of Tourism. And I'll see you again next week, Lucy. We'd like to throw the floor open for a few minutes if anyone has some comments to make about all this or have any questions to aim back at Steve. So the floor is yours. Yes, Lee.
I guess I wanted to ask you, there was a documentary that was on, it was called, I believe, Curse of the Axe. And and so I was just wondering because, I remember when I was watching it, I thought, oh, that is well cool. Because, of course, when the archaeologist went, it was Michael Barkham who, because she was trying to find the marker, I guess, that was on the axe. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that story. It came out a couple of years ago, maybe 4 years ago.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
It's from, I think it's from maybe Sault Ste. Marie among the Yora, which is a site, a 16th century village, native village in north of Toronto, in Ontario. And there they found, it was a sizable native community, the Yora, and there they found European stuff. Not a whole lot because it was early, 16th century. But one of the axe heads they found there had the maker's marks on it. And, the iron makers, they were tradesmen. They had their own marks, like pipe makers, and jewelers had their touch marks, and they could identify the mark as being a Basque mark. But I've never seen the show, but I've really looked at it. So they traced it back to Red Bay, and probably, by extension, back to Placentia. Although I don't know if Placentia is even mentioned in that story, but it should be, because that boat probably came here first and then went up to the north coast and traded it. But that was the big sort of, it was a movie, or not a movie, but a documentary. But it does talk about that connection with the Basque and that far into Ontario. Yeah. One of those petals I showed you, the black and white pictures, that's from the town of Grimsby. Now Grimsby is also near Toronto. And that's where they found that Basque kettle, and that's a 16th century kettle. So you can see the influence. I mean, when the native peoples in North America got a hold of these European copper and European metals, I mean, it was like gold to these people. Yeah. And so they really ended up their ante with regards to recognition amongst their own people. So it was, in fact, I'm pretty sure that it sort of shook up the entire native world when they began trading with European stuff and the fur trade and stuff. So, but yes, that's a little connection with that iron axe or the Ghost of the Axe or whatever it's called.
It was called Curse of the Axe.
Curse of the Axe.
It was just really interesting because exactly that they could have a connection and then they could follow it. Okay, sort of the coast of certainly the United States, and then just through trading and whatnot.
Yeah, and this is not even on the water. It's the same way even on the Hurons. It's on the Great Lakes. So it's not like it sort of went up in a river.
Yeah.
It went up, and then it went out over land. And, I mean, it took quite a route to get into the ground in the same way on the Hurons.
Yeah, but it was just really interesting because they found it there, and then they could trace it all the way to Labrador.
Yeah,
and
that's what they suspect. Yeah,
yeah.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, and again back to Placentia.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's the connection there.
I just wondering about the work you did over in Jersey side. Did you find something that might have resembled gravesite over there as well?
We did find bodies there. We found the alleged French graveyard, which turned out to be probably a mid-19th century burial of some poor souls who died on a ship, I think. But no, we didn't find anything. That was inside the bastion. Inside, they're still there when the water line was put through, I think in 1958, and Ken O'Keefe was quite kind and came down to show me where they located. We located that water line during our excavations, and then as soon as we found the water line, I said, oh, shoot, we're going to find the bodies, and the next day we found the bodies. But that wasn't the graveyard of a Basque. Now, I've heard rumors of graveyards, and I've also seen maybe something written about a Recollect graveyard. The Recollects were the Jesuits who came to Placentia from Quebec. So I heard, I've seen something up, but I don't have enough on it to see that yes, there was in fact a graveyard.
Yeah.
I mean, there may have been. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you have a graveyard here. There's one just right there, right? So will you have another one over in Jersey side? Perhaps. I'm not saying there wasn't, but I would be surprised. Why would you have more than one? Because these are I mean, I think these Basque guys, I believe they were Catholic. I don't know a lot about them. But the guy in Red Bay had a cross on his chest, so he was certainly some kind of Christian. And you talked about having priests with him or something. So I think they would have been put in consecrated ground. And with regard, I've heard other stories about like Portuguese churches and stuff here. You got to take these with a 500-pound bag of salt, because I don't. Talk is cheap, but you got to find the evidence. In fact, they're trying to find this is a little aside, but they're trying to find up in Carbonera the last couple of years. They're looking for the church built by this kind of Carbonera, who was an Italian priest who came over with John Cabot. So they're trying to find his church too. And again, I think that's talk is cheap, but he apparently built the church. So whether there's more churches in Placentia, I mean, who knows? But again, I think when you look at the early, period of history, you don't need to have a big cathedral that say mass. You can say mass in somebody's house or in the field or on the fish lake. I mean, I think it was that you were bringing down your spirituality was the important thing. It wasn't that you had to be inside the church. When they talk about churches, they might just be referring to, that's Santo Domingo's house where we had or at somebody's stage where we had a mass service. So don't be fooled by if you hear masses being said as being in churches. They may well just have been they just had to have the right people and do the right actions to make it spiritual, right? So I don't know. To get back to your question, I don't know if there's a graveyard up there, other than one that we found, but there may well be. Yeah.
I have a question. The slide you showed of the fort on Jersey side, and you identified the mansion, the governor's mansion.
Yeah, the Williams house.
So that was where on Jersey side?
Well, it's, I'm thinking, by the way the lay of the land is, and where the only thing that we know with no uncertainty is where the British fort was. Because it shows up very well, we found the archaeological evidence of it. So we know where that is. Now that was situated over the French Fort Louis, and we think Matt Simmons and his crew, I think in 2010, maybe 11 or 9, 10, 11, found parts of it. I'm pretty convinced, Matt convinced me that it's part of the original Fort Louis, or certainly the rebuild of Fort Louis. Fort Louis was built in 1691 and rebuilt largely in 1706, I think. So you got parts of that. So we're trying to orient it onto the landscape is very difficult. Because without the archaeological evidence to say, oh yeah, here's the building and here's the building, the map that shows the building. But for what I can orient it, and that's why I had that aerial photograph of the site. I think it's from the 1940s. The Americans probably photographed the daylight out of Essentia, I would imagine, in the 40s. And I oriented it that way to have the mountain, like the bottom of Castle Hill, running the same way as it is on the map. And it looks to me that the house, there were a number of houses at the base of the hill, with the officers' quarters, and they had their gardens, and they had what's called a menagerie, where they had animals and this kind of stuff, like counting sheep. They didn't have a zoo. But, and it's sort of a little bit away from that, but I'm thinking around where Phil's Cafe is. But we dug over there, and there wasn't much there, and when Phil moved the building, I just happened to stumble upon it one day when I came to visit, and I went down and looked around, there was no evidence of it. So, but we talk about mansions. Mansions are deceiving. Yeah, mansion in the 17th century would have been what you consider a hovel today, perhaps. But, it's Newfoundland and early Newfoundland, they weren't so much about the big opulence as what you had in it. So you could have had just a wooden structure, but filled with nice gear.
And the mention of the Portuguese church actually comes from Howley, and Howley had access to the archives in Rome.
Yeah.
And that was my question as to, Howley mentions it, he had different sources than the ordinary person.
Oh, likely,
and he
yeah.
could translate
coming from his brother Michael, no doubt, right? Who was the Archbishop of St. John's. Right? Archbishop Michael Howley, right? He was James Howley's brother.
Yes.
But, yeah, now whether, I don't know, but, maybe it was through you or from the Historical Society, someone talked about the Portuguese church over there.
But it's from Howley, from his ecclesiastic history of
right?
Yes, the bishop, yes.
Bishop Howley,
Yeah.
Yeah. Without, having better evidence of it. It's, unfortunately, he didn't say, and here's the map that shows the church.
No, he just said church is up.
Yeah, no, yes, exactly. Now, like I said, it may well have been there. But whether it was a church like we know it, or like St. Luke's even, I doubt it, but you never know. It could have just been a simple wooden structure, dropped down. It's all sand over there, right? There's hardly any rocks, so you could just drive. Even the French, they used the briquet style of architecture. They just drove sticks down into it. They didn't even have foundations like other cultures used, so they could have built a simple little room, and that's what they would have used as their meeting or their spiritual church. Might be there. Jumpins, yes, I'd love to see it. I'd love to come back as you guys. Absolutely would love to come back. This is the best place I've ever seen in my life. I've dug in many places over many years, and Essentia holds a lot more than what anybody has ever seen.
I think you might have had another question here.
Yes.
About 6, maybe 7 years ago, I live on there, that circle is where I live.
Okay, right on, yeah.
And some gentlemen came over and asked if they could look behind our house.
Probably me. Was it me?
I don't know.
Didn't love looking over. Yeah, no, maybe, yeah, but my big
Didn't
man.
make that much money.
Was he really tall?
Anyway,
whatever.
They looked in behind our house and they were looking at a wall that was there.
Yeah.
And I remember him saying, if it was an officer's house, the lady was very happy because she had a well in her back kitchen. Because the well has been there for...
Is that the well that got the battery acid poured down? Is that the same one?
I don't know.
It had a part of a... Yeah, there was a well. I've seen it. There's a spring there, right? All kinds of springs there,
down
right?
there anyway.
And there is a rocked up well. Yeah, I was over there. I think maybe
And
2006 or
probably,
7.
anyway, they looked at the back, and under our house, there is a wall.
Yeah.
And they said, we didn't build it, and the Millers didn't build it, and it was there.
Yeah. Could have been. The thing I think that's unfortunate for the base of that hill is that when they put the railroad track through,
Yeah.
it blew up the whole side of the hill. So you don't even really know what it was like even when they put that through, the 1880s or something, when they put the track through.
Yeah.
So they totally altered the landscape. And they just blew up the side of the hill. And they actually did that in the 1740s. I got a map that shows, it shows where they blew out the side of the hill. Then you get the rock for the rubble to raise up the ground on Jersey Town.
He was saying probably it was the beginning or the end of the foundation.
Oh, could be, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a gold mine over there, and because it was a tidal flat, there's not many places where you can actually live. I mean, the French constantly talked about flooding. That's why the British.
Oh, yeah, we got it now.
Oh, no, absolutely. I'm sure people, geez, I were in the room here before they filled it in. It was horrible, right? And it was a pool. It was like an island, right? That's why the Brits, when they built their fort in 74, they blew the side out of the hill. They raised and brought in almost 3 feet of rock, rock. That would have been very difficult to, I guess, for the poor old Irish, they relied on them to do all the stuff. Yeah, but they raised up the whole area of the fort by about 3 feet. So when we dug down there, like that picture that I showed of Ronnie Bishop standing up, and he's below the height of the ground, and we're still finding stuff down there. So that was 6 feet deep. So there's stuff everywhere over there. But it all starts about 3 feet down. But there's not many places, I guess what I'm trying to get at is where they could actually live. And that's because that's where the dry area is. So you're not going to live in that kind of...
Where we live.
Oh, you're up in the bay? Oh, yeah.
Then I need a rest.
You're down on the bottom of the hill, right?
If the water comes up to my doorstep, we're going to be praying for everybody in possession.
You are, John.
We're going to be praying for everybody in possession.
That's right, that's right. The Senja's sinking,
Yeah,
boys. I mean, we got proof of it over there. Everything we dug up is underneath about 1.5 foot of water.
Yeah.
And that's only from the 1700s. So,
And we're 11 feet above.
And you're right,
yeah. You're not going to stop that tap from coming in either, right?
No, there's no end.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess we'll move on, we're getting too negative now.
Oh, no, it's all good. This is all good.
Not really good for thinking.
Well, but no one in this room has to worry about it. I mean, they're in 100 years it'll be underwater, but it'll all be up and heaven. The most of it.
Okay, I don't know if there was any, we should end up soon, but there's a quick question someone wanted to get in. First of all, I was noticing people are recognizing people here. I didn't mention that Lucy had her husband with her, but I tend to forget husbands anyhow. But Ken Flynn and Charmaine Flynn, 2 past presidents, are here. We're glad to see them. It's past presidents here. President's Club or something. Okay, I guess we should, let me see where we go from here. I guess probably the next thing we'd do is say some thank you to people that have helped make this event possible. Our speaker, Steve Mills, of course, the students who performed the skit, the Department of Tourism, Recreation and Culture, the Placentia Lions Club, Town of Placentia, Laval High School students, and I think I mentioned them before, but Laval High School and students, because the high school helped us out with some props, and Connie New helped with some advice on this, and the script was written by Lee, of course. The Placentia Area Heritage Day, Theatre Day Heritage, by the way, I got that written backwards, for their costumes and the props to go along with this. Jason Council for video recording and webcasting. So anyone who want to share this with your friends in future, go into Jason's website, placentiabay.ca, and you should be able to trace it down from the first page there and see this again if you missed anything. I'd like to thank, of course, the members of the Placentia Area Historical Society who organized this event. And now we're going to move on to cutting the cake. We have a nice cake there with a Basque flag on it. By the way, we also have a flag up on the wall here, so we cut the one on the cake, you can still see it. And I'm going to ask Heather O'Keefe to cut that. Heather just joined our organization, and we're going to put her to work right away, so would you cut the cake for her, please? By the way, before we get to that, I'd like to welcome it in and partake of the refreshments. We may try and play some Basque music in the background, but we had some trouble with the equipment before. And before ending, I would like to remind people that the Historical Society has struggled to raise funds each year, and find out that there is a box on the table at back if you would like to contribute something to the operation